what's the difference between where we got from where Big Earl was back then in the early 1960s, right about the time JFK was assassinated, to today? Because that's the whole subject of what your future is all about. It really has a purpose to it. And so I've entitled this speech, How Did We Get Here? Well, we're headed to a change in the world. I'm not going to speak on this subject, but we're headed into, just think GPS, like the navigating unit, global pantheistic socialism, because we're headed into a new form of global governance. It is pantheistic. I think Brandon House would call it cosmic humanism. That's his term for it. But it's a syncretism of all religions along with atheism and the common secular consensus. And the new model that most of the elites would all like to have is socialism. We're seeing it in our country, in Europe. The United Nations is a basically socialist-run organization that would like to see that. And that's where we're headed. You need to understand that the United States is coming up on a fourth turning crisis. Fourth turning was a term created by two college professors, Strauss and Howe, about almost 15 years ago in their book. Neil Howe is still alive. Strauss died recently. And they say that every generation in a saeculum, which is a Latin word for 100 years, we go through 4 generational turnings, where you have different groups of people being born in different eras of that 100 years, and they're at different ages as we arrive at the fourth turning. And the fourth turning is always a time of crisis, like our Civil War. And a country has 2 choices. It's either going to reform, go back to some of the things that work, pull off the junk that isn't working, and become stronger and go forward, or it usually makes a change of government and a change of the way of life, and sometimes it happens, or a lot of times historically, it happens violently. And our fourth turning crisis is just about upon us. We're scheduled for it about 2014 and 15. They accurately predicted 10 years ago the outbreak of this onset of the economic crises, because there's a whole series of parallel events, economically, politically, and socially, that happen during one of these crises. So what's going to drive this crisis? Well, we are going to continue to have economic woes. On the Financial Sense Newshour that I co-host with Jim Puplava every week, I think he's read over 70 books on one issue, peak oil. But most of the people that monitor all of these trends are saying the American public has no idea what's going to hit it over the next 48 to 70 months in terms of problems. The economic woes are simply going to get worse. If you notice, we're basically heading into a currency crisis or a credit crisis, which will result in trade wars, which invariably result in real wars if they can't be resolved. There's an important thing you need to remember. Where goods and services don't peacefully cross borders, armies and missiles do. That's an historic fact. The next thing, as I said, a currency crisis, and we here in the United States and in Europe and in Japan are facing a massive entitlement crisis. We are insane for thinking we can pull off a health care program when we cannot even fulfill our current obligations, and some states are literally underwater, notably California. And I think they're about ready to vote Governor Moonbeam back in again this time, Jerry Brown, who destroyed the budget in the first place after Ronald Reagan managed to balance it. We are going to face rising prices due to, first of all, inflation, because we're destroying the dollar. It seems like the powers that be in our country are hit on destroying the dollar, and that will result in shortages. There is also coming, and this is, I'll mention briefly, but this is a subject for a different conversation, and that is a severe energy crisis, which will become really acute around 2014 and 15, beginning sometime next year. What's the bottom line of it? The areas where we're developing shortages are water. Food is going to start becoming scarce worldwide, but even water is going to become an issue in many, many parts of the world, potable water. But the energy crisis affects everything. It affects our economics, it affects food production. And what's happening is, on a daily basis, sometime next year, 2011, the world will be demanding more oil than we can produce on a daily basis. This is what peak oil is all about. The age of cheap oil is over. It's gone. Doesn't mean there isn't still a lot of oil out there. You all know we have these reservoirs that we're not tapping into, right? That's been part of the dispute over the last couple of years. That's not the issue, and people would have you think that that's the issue of peak oil, that the world is running out. We are running out of cheap oil. Almost all of the world's major oil fields are in decline, and all of the oil that we can get is more expensive. And those alternatives that we're talking about, you know, windmills, which I like to see over by Seattle or down along the Columbia Gorge. Windmills, solar, good ideas to augment the power supply. I think Steve Elwert will be talking about some of this later. But have you ever seen a windmill on a car or a jetliner?